Hi everyone. This is Cheryl Bishop, and I'm in for Brian Russell today. As always, Brian does a little housekeeping item discussion here. Just to let you know, we'll be back to our regularly scheduled programming in 2024 with virtual lunch and learns on the second Wednesday of each month. And our evening meetings are always on the fourth Wednesday when we have them. And so those will be in the month of January, April, May, and October. And then, of course, in December, we always have the fourth Wednesday meeting on the second Wednesday. So we have a double header like we do today. So tonight we'll have an evening meeting as well. And that's primarily because we just bump up against the holidays. It makes it hard for us to have that fourth Wednesday in December. So in January for Lunch and Learn, we did have a speaker. She got called to duty. She's in the reserves. And so right now we're at TBD at the moment, but hopefully we'll get someone soon and let you know what that's going to be all about. January's evening event, that's going to be an in-person networking event and will be held again at the Outback Steakhouse, which is where we are this evening. So now for some meeting reminders. As George was saying earlier, for those of you who were on early, we use chat for just about everything, saying hi, reporting tech issues, as George had mentioned. We'll also use our chat to answer any questions that could be posed by Kim, our speaker today, with the exception, of course, of the poll that we do have for you. If you have a question for Kim, just post it in the Q&A. And we'll get to that either throughout the presentation or we'll save some time at the end to address those for you. And now a little background about our speaker. So with over 2 decades of expertise in overseeing pivotal projects and leading delivery teams, Kim Essendrup stands as a seasoned authority in project management initiatives, serving as the CEO and co-founder of RaidLog.com and contributing his strategic insights as a partner at the Colm Group. Kim is at the forefront of project management consultancy. A distinguished figure in the field, he further shares his wealth of knowledge and his industry perspectives as the co-host of the widely acclaimed Project Management Happy Hour podcast. His commitment to advancing project management practices is exemplified by his recent accomplishment, the publication of his second book titled The Ultimate Guide to RaidLog. And through his multifaceted roles and accomplishments, Kim continues to shape and elevate the landscape of project management. And lucky for us, he's able to share his expertise with our chapter today. So over to you, Kim, and thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you very much, Cheryl, and hi, everybody. Thanks for your time today. So I'll just jump right into it. A little bit of background about me. Been a coach and trainer, been a project manager, as Cheryl said, for quite a long time. And as I say in the beginning of all my podcast episodes, I've made all the mistakes that I'm going to try to help you avoid today. And that certainly applies to today's presentation. Now, I've got 2 jobs that I absolutely love, going on 3 now. The first one is that I'm co-host of the Project Management Happy Hour podcast. And I'm really lucky to have been able to do that because it gives me a great opportunity to speak with a lot of amazing people in the industry and in the community and learn a lot from them. But as cool as that is, my favorite part about being part of PM Happy Hour is that I get to talk to our listeners. I get to engage directly with the kinds of people who are passionate about project management to actually listen to a podcast about project management for fun. And it's really fascinating to learn about the kinds of things that work for project managers at all stages in their career and in different industries. But it's maybe even more interesting to learn about the things that aren't working for them and the things that they're struggling with. And hopefully that's something that I can help them out with. Now, my second great job is I work for a company called Colm Group. And we are a company of project and portfolio tool nerds. And so all the tools that you use to manage your projects, planning tools, like, those kinds of things, we get to help implement those for big enterprises. And as such, I get the really cool opportunity to work with a bunch of project management organizations and portfolio leaders in all different kinds of industries, IT, biotech, fast food, construction. And I get to see what's working well for them. And I also get to see what's not working well for them and what they're struggling with. Which again is maybe even more morbidly fascinating, and it's really fun to try to help them. And I feel really privileged being able to see the successes and struggles and challenges that individuals and organizations face when managing projects and portfolios. And having done this for a long time, there are two main truths that I've really sort of taken away from this. And the first thing is that first truth is that no matter who you are and what your industry is, projects are hard, right? And I think we all know this. Project management is a messy, challenging business. And that's why you have to have human leaders like us, like everybody on this call, and an entire professional discipline around taking these initiatives and making them happen. And the second universal truth that I've come across is this, is that projects don't go wrong because of the complicated things. They go wrong because of the basics. It's the fundamentals. It's not that you didn't have a 1,500 line project plan. It's not that you didn't do a PERT analysis or run your Monte Carlo statistical analysis. It's when we don't pay attention to the basics, the fundamentals, that things really go off track. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, how to keep your projects on track, on course, and course correct if they start to go off track a little bit. So today's objectives. Number one, I want to provide an overview of what a RAID log is as an operational tool and a knowledge management tool, and talk about how a RAID log can be used to help you when with your projects. But before we go there, I'd like to start with a little story about RAID logs. Some years ago, I was offered a really cool opportunity to lead a project management organization, actually to build it for a services company that was global. And my PMO is going to be pan-European. It's going to be all European companies or divisions for this organization. And we're going to pull them all together in this fledgling PMO. And it sounded like a lot of fun. So I was definitely in. And I was living in Phoenix, as I am now, and flying out to Europe maybe once, maybe twice a month. But I was working primarily remotely in the early morning hours, my time. And not long after I started, and it was Friday morning, my time, I got a phone call from my vice president. And if you've been in project management for a little while, you know that when you get a phone call from an executive sponsor on a Friday afternoon, it's almost never, ever good news. And that was the case here as well. And so my VP said, look, we've got a really big problem with a project. And since now you're in charge of the PMO, it's your problem. You need to fix it. And apparently what we had was a team that was delivering a project somewhere in the Midlands of UK. So kind of up kind of in the mid part, kind of out in the sticks. And the project had gone so far off track that not only did the customer, which was a municipality, they issued a formal letter saying that not only were they going to cancel the project, but they were going to charge us tens of thousands of pounds for the trouble that we had put them through. So my weekend was over. And by Monday morning, I was sitting, jet lagged, exhausted, drinking some of the worst coffee ever in this really dank 70s vintage conference room somewhere in the UK Midlands, getting utterly roasted by the customer's executives. And I was there in this conference room, big long conference table. My team was on this side and their team was on that side. And they were going on and on about how our team wasn't doing this, our team wasn't doing that. We weren't managing, we weren't getting things done. Customer had no idea what was going on. And every complaint that they had, every issue they raised, I thought, that actually sounds legit. That sounds like a real issue. Okay, I get it. And, so what do you do? Well, first, my strategy was really let's let them talk. Let's let them vent. And so I let them talk about the problem, asked a couple clarifying questions, but I just kind of let them exhaust all the concerns. And when they were done, I said, anything else? I said, no, that pretty much covers it. So I looked at my team on this side of the conference table and I said, well, what about you? What kind of challenges have you had? Oh my gosh, they lit up. And they were talking about, well, the customer didn't have this ready. They didn't give us this, so we couldn't do our job. They weren't responsive. They didn't support us. And every complaint they said, I thought, that actually sounds pretty legit. And so when this was all done, everybody was out. I just kind of let the room quiet down. And I looked up and down the table and I said, okay, can you show me your RAID log? And they all just kind of looked at each other. And I looked at the customer side. Do you have a RAID log? Can you show me your RAID log? And at that moment, I wasn't sure if they didn't know what a raid log was and they were too embarrassed to admit it, or if they knew what a raid log was and suddenly realized that they hadn't been keeping one and realized how bad that was that they hadn't even been maintaining one. Either way, it had the desired result. Everybody's kind of stepped back a little bit. So I said, okay. And I flipped open my laptop, plugged into the projector, which projected on the end of the room here. And I had a fresh, clean raid log ready to go. And I said, okay, let's begin. And I'll come back to that story later on. But let's look at what a raid log is before we go any deeper. And so I've done some research, and I don't know if anybody knows who actually invented the raid log or who first used that, where it really came from. But I do know they've been around for decades and decades. They were old school when I started, and I didn't have any gray in my hair. So just a quick poll. If I could ask George or Cheryl to set this up, I've got a poll for you. I'm just really curious. How many of you have ever seen or know what a raid log is? So we'll turn that poll up, and if you could answer, it'll be interesting to get here. But a raid log, in its most simple and original form, is really just a spreadsheet, a workbook that has 4 tabs, one each for risks, your risk register, action items, your issue log, and your decision log, RAID for raid. And that's all there is to it. But there's actually so much more to do it. A raid log together is the tool that you use to run your project. So, and what I mean by that is you've got your plan, right? You've got your work breakdown structure. You've got your 500-line project plan. You're using your PPM tool or Jira or Monday or whatever tools that you're using. That's your plan. Raid log is the tool and the methodology that you use to keep that plan on track and to course correct when it starts to go maybe a little bit off track. And it's a simple fundamental tool. And, for me personally, I learned how to use raid logs. I used them a lot, but I found that whenever I had a project that was starting to go off track, going off in the weeds, I would stop myself and realize I'm not actually doing a raid log, or I haven't been keeping it up. And so this has helped encourage me to really adopt it and really use it for all my projects. So you've already got all your schedules, all your plans. Why would you take the time to go through and add another tool to the things that you're using on a regular basis? Well, quiz time. What is the cause of most projects going wrong? Well, it's because of the basics, right? And a raid log is valuable because it helps us manage those very basics that we very often lose sight of. But let's get a little more specific. Why do things go wrong? Now, in my experience, projects don't go wrong because of the tasks. It's not because of your Gantt. It's about the things that go around those tasks, the things you have to do to make the plan go off correctly. Specifically, when we think about all the things that cause our projects go off track, and if we gave everybody Post-it notes and we had you write down, okay, this went wrong on this project, this went down on this project. Of course, you've got things like communication, you've got requirements, you've got all these different things, in specific things that go wrong. But if we were to take a step back and say, all right, can we categorize all these by risks? Things that if we had sat down, we thought, yeah, we could have probably identified that as a potential problem, or as an issue, something that went wrong that maybe we could have managed better or stayed more on top of, or a decision that was not made by the right people, or maybe even worse yet, not really formally made or not implemented, or action items, just all the little sundry hundreds of little things that pile up that we didn't really keep on top of. If we took all those causes, we could probably categorize those almost completely in those 4 categories. And so we think about a raid log, it's really an operational tool. It's an operational methodology that we can use for our projects. Now, of course, there's a planning component as well. We want to plan around our risks and feedback our response plans into our project plan. And then through the course of our project, things will come up. So there's some ad hoc planning. Oh, this new risk came up. Oh, this new unforeseen issue came up. Oh, we've got a decision we've got to make, because projects are exercises in progressive elaboration, which means we've got to make decisions along the way, formalize those, and track those. Now, the worst thing you can do from a planning perspective when it comes to your raid log is do what a lot of us did as newer project managers, and you might be able to sympathize with this, is that I'm a brand new project manager, and I found out about this thing called a risk register, and I'm going to be the project manager guy, and I'm going to do the project manager thing, and I fill out my risk log, and I'm working with my team. We did all this identification, great risk log, and then it goes off in the dark corner of SharePoint somewhere where it's never seen again. And so using the RAID log as an operational tool helps us ensure that that doesn't happen, that we keep risks front and center, that we're staying on top of them. So it should always be something that we use on a regular basis. Now, side question here, has anybody heard of the A and D in RAID standing for assumptions and dependencies? You may have. I won't bother to do a poll on this, but you may have heard that. And I think tracking assumptions and dependencies is very important, of course, because when you think of assumptions, they're things, they're planning assumptions, right? You can't have a scope, you can't have a plan unless you've made certain planning assumptions. And it's really good to document those. But if we think of RAID log in terms of an operational tool, if I've made assumptions in planning, how do I handle those in operations during the delivery of the plan? Well, the very first things that go in your risk register should probably be all the assumptions you made during planning, because what if those assumptions are wrong? Those are the first risks, some among the first risks that you have. And so I would say there's not as much of a need to have an assumptions register in your RAID log for operational purposes, because your assumptions go straight into your risk register and you manage them as risk through the course of the project. Still useful to have maybe assumptions documented with your plan. And I'm never going to say don't track your assumptions, but I'll say it's much more important to track assumptions as risks during the operational delivery of the project. Now, for dependencies, this is more of a style of project management. Most project managers I speak with, they prefer to have dependencies, external dependencies in particular, put into their work breakdown of their schedule, because they're usually tied in, they're dependencies in part of the schedule. It's really easy to see them in a Gantt. They're date dependent. They should have assignments just like all the rest of your work packages. So they do fit really well in your schedule. And I'm down with that. But there is a case, which I'll talk about today, where having an external dependencies register attached to your RAID log, so maybe RAIDD, I don't know, RAID, put another D on the end or in the beginning, like I saw here, is can be very, very useful. And I'll talk about that a little more later today. But before we go on to that, I want to talk about an elephant that very often comes into the room: Agile. Oh, we work Agile. And we've got, everybody knows the Agile Manifesto, or you should know or be familiar with it, and Agile ways of working have really been tremendous. They've really influenced all of project management, I think, for the better. And I use Agile methodologies for a lot of things that I do, and I think it's great. But even if you're working Agile, does that mean nothing ever goes wrong? That there's no risk that anything will go wrong? Does that mean that there's no more decisions that need to be made or documented? Or there's no action items that have to be done that aren't represented in the backlog? I don't think so. In fact, I strongly believe that there is a strong place for a RAID log. And if we just talk about risk, I've done some research in risk management in the Agile world, and it's not really a very mature area. In fact, I only found one book on the topic specifically about Agile risk management, and here's a copy of it by Alan Moran. You can find his book on Amazon. And at the end of the day, after he talks about the Agile ways of working and risk management and how to use them together, really what it comes down to is understand the risk thresholds for your product or your project. And then what you should do, what he recommends, is you should make a list of all your risks. Maybe put them in a spreadsheet or something and track them with a plan to respond to them. So he basically says, make a risk register. So again, there's a lot of growth, I think, left to happen in the Agile world from around a risk management perspective. But everything I've read so far really indicates to me, and from my own personal experience, RAID logs work just as well, maybe even more important in that world. Now, it might not so much just be on the projects, but I would say from a product owner perspective, as a product owner myself, I use a RAID log to manage the risks, actions, issues, and decisions and dependencies for my products. And you can even think of it from a Scrum Master kind of team lead perspective as well. You need to manage what's going on with the team and help them be successful as well. All right. So before I jump in, any questions so far? I see a lot of commentary here. It's hard for me to read this at the same time. Cheryl, George, do we have any key questions we want to hit at this time?
Hey, Kim. So I was been keeping an eye on Q&A. Don't see anything in there. There has been some chat back and forth. As we discussed yesterday, there are some members from Blue Cross of Idaho on the call, and they do have something similar called a DARE log. And so we've been chatting about that a little bit. But yeah. And then I think Billy had mentioned, you had asked if anyone had used or seen this type of log using assumptions and dependencies, and he had responded that yeah, he had. And so apparently there are some organizations that are using it that way. But I'm with you. This is more of a action-oriented kind of a run. You're executing the project at this point. And so to me, I would have to agree that this is more about actions and issues, decisions, things that are happening as you're progressing through the project, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Extensibility is a power of the tool. I'll actually have a whole section. I'll talk about that in a moment.
Okay.
All right.
And Billy also says they use Smartsheet versus Excel to track these items.
Yep. Smartsheets does have some weaknesses in this area, which I can talk through if we have time. Well, I'll keep going, and if we have time at the end, I'll talk about. I can talk about tools if you like. But so let's talk about what risks are. I won't go too deep into some of these because, a lot of us are probably PMPs or working on getting there. And so you've probably been over this and had so many quiz questions on this. You're not looking for any more, but risk management risks are, of course, uncertain events, which can affect your project, but have not occurred yet. When it comes to risk management, it's the process is really the important thing. The whole process of stepping back with your team and saying, okay, where can this thing go off track? And what are we going to do to help prevent it from going there? And that's really, for me, the important thing about risk management. And we've got a lot of analytical tools, and we can quantify things. You can really go into it. But at the end of the day, it's really just stopping and trying to figure out where it can go wrong and avoid it. Because the real truth is something that we need to reconcile with how we behave as project managers is that statistically, most projects will go wrong at some point. And I feel safe in saying that. And I'm kind of guessing most people agree with me and you're doing so. If we know going in that something is probably going to go wrong or something's going to go a little bit off track, we just need to kind of course correct it, clarify, refine. You're going to be doing yourself and your project a disservice if you don't stop, consider, and do some level of planning for risk. And of course, the level of planning you do for risk should be commensurate with your project. If you've got a little 2 or 3 week, low stakes, low impact project, then, don't spend 10, 12, 20 hours doing risk management. But if you've got a 2-year program with a $50 million budget, you're going to need to get quite a lot more involved in that, of course. And one of my favorite ways to think about risk, I had an opportunity to interview one of the race directors for Ironman Triathlon for my podcast. And I don't know if you're familiar with Ironman, but it's I've done a few of them, and it's a triathlon. It's a kind of a ridiculous event. And you think about it, it is 140.6 miles of race that's done in a single day. The event has a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike ride, and a 26 mile marathon at the end. And if you think about how would you plan an event like that? I mean, you've got 2,000 or 3,000 athletes, you've got 3,000 to 5,000 volunteers, you've got friends, family. You have to close down 140 miles of street, road, trail, waterway to do this. In the meantime, you've got thousands of athletes that are pushing themselves to the absolute physical limit. And you've got to try and get them through that alive. Through that 140 mile course, you've got to get tons of water and food and bananas and people, and you've got to close off streets and intersections, and the whole endeavor just is ridiculous when you think about it. Can you imagine the project that goes behind that? And you've got to pull it all off in one day. So I asked the race director, I said, how do you manage this day? You've got one day when your entire event happens. You're affecting thousands of people, plus the entire municipality, 140 miles across, tons of logistics, food, first aid, keeping people from drowning. How do you think about risk in that scenario? And he said, I think an hour ahead. And what he meant by that was he thinks of, where is the lead athlete in this whole race? Where are they going to be in an hour? And how is everything ready for them? So if they're just getting into the water right now, they're going to be out of the water in an hour. Do I have a way for them to get out of the water? Is that open? Is it clear? Do we have people there to support them? Do they have a clear way to get and change their clothes, to get on their bike? So he's always thinking an hour ahead. And I love this because this is a way that we can think about risk in our projects, because, we've got this 50 risk register, 100, whatever it is. We've got all this stuff going on. How do you keep it straight in your head? Well, think an hour ahead. What's going to happen in my project in the next week, the next month, whatever the correct horizon is for the scale of my project? What are the things that can go wrong? And so that way we're consistently planning and cycling through that. I'll talk a little bit more about this in the moment as it connects to decisions. But when we think about risk, we want to always think about that process, capture, always cycling through that. In the meantime, let's talk about actions. Action items, they're just that. Now, we've all got some kind of task list, task plan, whether it's a work breakdown structure or we've got a backlog, whatever it is. There's all the plan, all the stuff that we do. And that plan usually consists of things where we have to get resource assigned to it. We have to, or pay external people to do it. We usually put that together in some kind of a critical path, or it goes into the backlog, however we manage it. But those are things that directly contribute to delivering project deliverables, project value. Is that the only thing that a project manager does? Of course not. We know that. You've got, out of every meeting, you've got action items. Even among the things you're looking at here, when I've got risks, there's things I have to do to respond to that risk or check in on that risk. I've got issues. I got to follow up on those. I have to do things to prepare to get decisions made. And once a decision's made, I have to go and implement those decisions. And so action items have a really strong place in a RAID log, because there are so many things that we need to do, that we need to keep organized, to assign and delegate and do ourselves, that are not necessarily the kinds of things that you would put into your project backlog or your project schedule. There's always going to be some things that don't fit. Now, which things go which direction, that's going to be your judgment call as a professional. But there's still going to be things that go into the action items versus what goes into your plan. Now, nobody, I think, ever gets through an issue and says, hey, I'd like to have some more of that. Do they? And so that's really the purpose of the issue log. It's a log which tracks the unexpected problems, or anything, honestly, that takes your plan off track, including those things that you might have expected, which were previously documented risks, or those things that just really hit us out of the blue and were unexpected. And when you've got a really big issue, and if you've gone through this, when you hit a really big critical issue in a project, your whole life is that issue, right? That's all you can think about. You're communicating it. I mean, if you've got outages, big problems, you need a platform, a tool that you can rally around as a team. And this is where a risk register is really good. So you can point everybody back to the risk register. This is where we're logging things. This is where you're tracking things, because when it's all done, we might be in a situation where an executive or your customer, somebody says, okay, I need a debriefing on what exactly has happened on this issue. Why did it happen? What did you do? And how are we going to keep this from happening again? And that's really what our issue log does. It's also can be seen as, when you get to the end of a project, if you didn't end up meeting your baselines, your schedule, your budget, your scope, whatever they were, if you ended up not landing where you expected to be, there's some difference between your plan and your actual. Ideally, between your change request and your issues, you can explain this is where we meant to be, this is where we ended up, and this is why. So something that can help you tell the story and learn from for future projects what went wrong, why, and how might we avoid this in the future if that's possible, or at least plan contingencies for that. It's also one of the best and richest sources of lessons learned that you can possibly find because, as I said, none of us probably want to do this. Maybe some of these would be hard to avoid in the future, but it might be worth trying or at least learning enough from it that you can budget contingencies in case these things do go wrong again. Finally, let's talk about decisions. And this is really surprisingly neglected by a lot of us. I'm guilty here. Because, as I mentioned earlier, projects are all exercises in progressive elaboration. We know the least about a project the day we start it, and the most the day we finish it. And between the beginning and the end, we have to make decisions as we learn things. Is this still right? Do we want to, which direction we go? We've got 1 option, 2 options, 5 options. We need to get decisions made along the way. And that decision making for our project to be successful, it needs to be intentional, right? As project managers, project leaders, we are usually not the ones that are making the decisions, but it's our job to get the decisions made, get them made well, and then to implement the results of those decisions. So it's in our vested interest to go in and be very highly engaged in decision making. And we also very often have to be the ones that say, okay, this decision, if we're going to revisit a decision, we first remind everybody we've already made this decision and here's why, and here's who was part of that. Now, the team may decide through stakeholders, they may say, well, we need to go revisit this or we need to change that decision. But having a decision register, having a platform to log all that material puts you in a position where you say, yes, we can do that, but here are the impacts. And so that way it's not a surprise when decisions are made and it causes delays or cost overruns. You've got that decision log that you can fall back to. And it's also great for another situation. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but you're humming along, you've got this project, you've been doing it for a while, you get towards the end of the project and some sponsor, some stakeholder has changed during the course of the project, or there's a new manager in town, new executive, and they come up to you and they'll say, why did you do it this way? Why did you do that? And it's, if you don't have a good solid decision log, now you've got to say, well, kind of this is why, or now you're going back and you're searching SharePoint through meeting minutes, or you're trying to search through your Google and trying to find all this and reconstruct the timeline of what the decision was and why it wasn't. It's so much nicer to have a decision log that you can readily and easily access. It won't prevent people from waffling or coming back on their decisions, but it'll make your management of that situation quite a bit better.
Hey, Kim. So Caroline had entered in the chat that her requirements documents are really quite long. And would the decision tab be used to capture those requirements in quotes, or are these decisions that were made after build is underway, like change decisions as an example?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think so. Usually, requirements, as indicated, they can be pretty long and lengthy documents, but there should be a log of the changes made to those. Right. So once you get started, or you're going to start making changes to any approved requirements, you need that kind of change control. Change, as I think PMI says, change is okay. Uncontrolled change is not okay. So you can track that through decisions, or I've also seen, I was going to mention this later, sometimes another tab that will be added to a RAID log is a C for change requests. And so it's a little bit of a judgment call. And if you track a change in requirements as a decision or as a change request, usually it's done as a change request. If it has to be formal and if there are funds involved, then yeah, you need to usually do it there. if it's an internal project and a management call to say, no, we want to do this instead of that, and there's not as much commercial, even if there's a little bit of commercial impact, sometimes a decision register is as good, or maybe you flag a decision as a change request. But either one of those, it's good to track that. That makes sense? All right. All right. So, whoops. So those are our decisions. Now, let's talk a little bit about decision latency. This is really interesting. I don't know if anybody here has heard of something called the chaos report. It's a industry report put out by the Standish Group, and they do this every 2 years, and they've done it forever. And what they do with the chaos report is they study project failure and success. They go and they talk to a whole bunch of companies. They do these really in-depth interviews, and they do a really deep analysis on it. It's really fascinating. So if you've ever been online or Googled and somebody says, well, this percent of projects fail and this percent of projects succeed, most of those statistics are probably from the Standish Group, or they're from another group that was inspired by the Standish Group. And I had the opportunity, so when you have a podcast, it's funny, you can ask the most amazing and influential industry leaders to hop on your podcast, and they'll just say, yeah, okay. So I got a chance to interview Jim Johnson, who runs the Standish Group, and came up with this whole idea of doing this industry study on project success and failure. And I had him on the podcast, and I said, hey, what is, let's get down to brass tacks here. What is the number one cause of project failure? And he said something I did not expect. He said the number one cause of project failure is decision latency. I'll say that again. Number one cause of project failure is decision latency. And at one time I thought, that's really profound. And I thought, what the heck does that mean? Because if you're right, when I think of decisions, I've got like phase gates, I've got to approve my vendor selection. I've got that in the schedule. So if I've got that decision scheduled, how is that a problem? Because I've already got that there. And he also said that it didn't matter if you work agile, if you work more plan-based, predictive, it's the same. It's exactly the same. Decision latency kills you the same way. And so I started thinking about it, decision latency, in terms of this context of RAID logs and RAID management, specifically risk and decision management. And if you think of it, so I've got risk in a project, or risk comes up, and or even before then, I have a risk in my business. And one of the ways I might respond to that risk is by making a decision to create this project. And so when I make that decision, well, I'm going to do this project. Well, you know what? Doing this project, it kind of comes with some risk. I'm investing all these resources, time, money to go and do this thing, to implement this decision to address the risk. And so and if I go even closer inside my project, when I identify a risk, I'm going to do something to respond to that risk, even if the response is, well, let's not change the way we're doing the project. Let's just throw a few more bucks in the budget just in case it happens so that we can respond. But we've got this cycle. We'll identify something could go wrong. What am I going to do about it? What's my remaining risk? Or, let's monitor this risk and see if it happens. And if this risk happens, let's decide how we're going to handle it. And this kind of becomes a cycle, kind of like a wheel. And as this wheel turns, as we go through our project and what's the next thing? I'm thinking an hour ahead, just like the Ironman race director. What's going to happen next? What are the things that could go wrong? How am I going to respond to them? What this does is, as you cycle through this, you gradually make progress through your project. And this is really when we kind of had the aha moment, is that this is what the latency is. The slower this wheel goes, the longer time it takes for me to say, oh, well, this risk could happen. And then the longer I wait before I actually decide to do something about it. or maybe it's an issue. So I see the longer it takes me to detect an issue or identify that I have a risk, and the slower I am to make a decision, the higher the probability that I'm not going to catch it in time. And this whole thing is going to start going off track. So the more that cycles through, the more I can stay on top of my risk, my issues, my decisions, and cycle through that and stay on top of it, the easier it's going to be for me to course correct and keep my project on track. So this is how we're thinking in our team, and how we do through our coaching and speaking. Think about decision latency in the context of a project. It's this always ongoing cycle of risk and issue identification, and then deciding how we're going to handle them over and over. All right, let's talk about RAID. Now, can you only ever put, I think we already foreshadowed this, can you only ever put 4 tabs in a RAID log? Of course not. And that's one of the great things about a RAID log, is that I, as a project manager, I can decide, you know what, on this project, man, I need to add some more stuff to help keep my head together. And so we can add another column, we can add more content. And a few of my favorite additions for a RAID log, I'll run down them here. First and foremost is a lesson learned log, because you want to catch these lessons as you go along. What went well? What went wrong? You want to capture that, because if you wait till the end of the project and do a retrospect 3, 6, 9, 18 months down the line, first of all, when you get done with an 18-month project, if you're like me, you're ready to get on with the next thing. I mean, you're done with that one. You don't really feel like you want to necessarily spend a whole lot more time on that. You may have already lost some resources moving on to the other thing. So you don't want to wait till the end of the project to start capturing lessons learned. And if you've got a long project, that can be 6, 12 months worth of learnings you could have already implemented. So capture those as you go along in the lessons learned log. The second one, this depends on the organization. We talked a little bit of a change log. It's nice to have some, even if you have a little more complex paperwork or processes for documenting, for assessing and deciding on change requests, which most organizations do, it's nice to have somewhere handy, very accessible, just a list of those changes, the ones that were submitted or requested, and then if they were accepted or rejected. You can do that in a separate change log if you don't want to do them in decisions. It can also be nice, depending on the size and breadth of your team, to have easy access to a stakeholder list. This is really nice if you're coming into a new organization, or if you're doing a project with a customer and they have a very large organization, and is really nice to have an easy way to start capturing who's who in the zoo from the beginning and track that. You can even extend that to contact information, or even a racing matrix, and have that at hand. Sometimes I've seen it extended with a calendar of some kind, or you've got key events, blackout dates, holidays, PTO, things like that. If you are delivering a project that's part of a professional services, having key or contractual milestones is really nice. It can be really cool to have that there for easy copy paste for a status report, or for conversations with your customers. And then, of course, let's talk about external dependencies some more. And as I talk about external dependencies, let's go back to our slightly stuffy, maybe mildewy conference room in the UK Midlands. So I was standing there, I was sitting at the conference room. I had my RAID log flipped open, and I said, okay, let's revisit this. Let's start with the very first and biggest issue. And I said, customer, what is the biggest issue? I know we just went through them, but let's go through these one by one. And so I had them go through them again, but as they did, I typed them, and I'm looking up and I'm pointing up what I'm typing out, so I can exactly capture what they feel the issue is in their words. And they'd correct it. No, it's more like this, more like that. And so now I captured it to their satisfaction. Okay, next issue. Documented. Next issue, next issue, next issue. Until we had a kind of a nice long list there of issues. And then I went to my side of the team. I said, all right, guys, let's go through your issues one more time and make sure we capture them. And it was interesting, as we started to capture them, especially from our side, there are a lot of issues that we had that the customer had no idea that we're feeling like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? How is that a problem? I didn't know that. So we're capturing these and capturing all these issues. And we got to the end. I said, any more issues? And they said, no. I said, okay. And so we're looking at all these issues and somebody says, they actually, it looks like these are dependencies, right? Because our team was supposed to do things for the customer, but we didn't because we needed things from the customer for us to do the work, but the customer didn't know about that. And after we talked about that, I said, okay, well, let's open up let me create a new tab for dependencies. So I opened up the dependencies and I said, okay, let's go through a list of all the things that our team is depending on your team to do. And we captured all those and, kind of working through this and really kind of going back and forth. What do you mean that's not in the contract? And so really deep, enlightening conversation, still challenging, but we're talking through all these things. And what was really cool was that through this process that lasted well into the afternoon, instead of our side of the table facing their side of the table, gradually all the chairs in the room started to turn off to the side. And it was not our side versus their side. It was both of us working together against the challenges that we had in front of us. We had sort of externalized our conflict into issues that prevented our joint team from being able to execute this contract and be successful with the project. And that was really the magical thing of all this, was that it helped us externalize that and work through those. And this really goes to illustrate one of the key principles of RAID logs and really tools in general that I've kind of found out the hard way. And it's this: the more chaotic your environment or the project or the initiative, you're in a merger situation, and we know half the people sitting at this table are going to be fired in 6 months. However scary or chaotic that environment is, the more people will gravitate to the simplicity of a RAID log because it's dead simple. You don't have to have a PMP and 10 years of experience to understand what's going on in a risk register. You don't have to know all that stuff to understand what an activity list is. It gives you a common platform for you to come together and work on these things. And what was really cool was that through the course of the following week with my team in the UK, what I loved was the customer's team. We'd be working together, having other meetings, and I'll be talking to someone in the hallway, and they say, "Oh, hey, we identified this new thing. We got to get this stuff done. Let's get it on the RAID log." And my heart just swelled 3 sizes. I was just so happy that it was now a platform, something we could work on together, because it was so simple that even non-project managers could easily understand what we're trying to do. Now, before I tell you the end of that story, let's talk about some specific ways that you can leverage your RAID log. So first and foremost, and maybe obviously, is it helps you stay on top of your projects. These are the things that you need to be monitoring and keeping track of to help your plan stay successful. Of course, you still have to maintain your plan, of course, but this is the tool you can use to help identify when things are going off track and stay on top of it. If you are like almost all of us, you manage more than one project, and it's really difficult. And there's a lot of literature on this right now about the impacts of task switching. Because when you're managing this project and now I've got to stop and think about this other completely different project, completely different deliverables, different timelines, different team members, different stakeholders, that takes a little toll on your mental cycles. And it can be challenging to do that. And if you've got 3, 5, 6, 8 projects like some people do, that can be really tough and take up a lot of your time. And you can lose track of stuff because there's so much going on. And so having a RAID log, being able to say, okay, I'm going to go work on this project now, pop up on my RAID log, where am I? Okay, I'm good to go. And you can go dive into that project. Really, really helps with that. The next one, if you're reading ahead, you might have been excited about this one. Never take meeting minutes again. Let me tell you about this. So my mentor that I had that taught me about RAID logs, I was talking to her one day and she says, I was asking her about meeting minutes. And she said, "Oh, I don't do meeting minutes." And I said, "What are you talking about?" Because she managed these great, big, complex merger and acquisition projects. I said, "How do you not do meeting minutes?" And she says, "Well, What are the important things that come out of any meeting that are worth documenting? Well, action items, of course. You're talking about risks or updating them or identifying new ones. You're working through issues or identifying new ones or closing them out, or you're making decisions. What else is there? And that really blew my mind. Now, for me, it's just like 3 inches too far for me. So for me personally, I don't completely discard meeting minutes, but I will say the meeting, I don't really technically do meeting minutes. I'll do maybe a summary and the email, but I track everything in the RAID log because if you think of it, if I track all my risks, my updates to risks, actions, issues, and decisions in a meeting minutes document somewhere, where does the document go? It goes the same place that spreadsheets go to die. It's going to go off in the SharePoint somewhere or go die in somebody's inbox. So keeping those in the central location, like a RAID log, lets you act on those and make sure that that stuff happens. Because I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but the worst thing they can do in a meeting is you get together with people and say, "Didn't we already talk about this? Didn't we already figure out what we're going to do on this?" You don't want to do that. So managing up and managing down. Well, so if I'm managing a project, I need to go speak to a sponsor or an executive stakeholder, or my manager about a particular project and give them status or ask them their support. It's a great exercise to just take that spreadsheet, or even a team member. If I'm going to manage down, I take my RAID log and I just filter. Show me my top 5 risks, top 5 issues, or filter for all the ones that I need this sponsor or this stakeholder, if the ones that they're involved in, or I need their help on, or a decision that they're going to make, filter for that and sit down and say, okay, I've got 2 risks and 1 key decision I need to talk to you about that are going to impact us this month. Great way to manage up. Managing down, if you're a manager, you manage project managers, you of course want to see how are they managing their project? How are they getting decisions made? How are they handling the risks and the issues? What's going on? How are they managing it? What better way is there to do that than say, all right, I don't want to see every detail, but show me your RAID log on this project. Tell me what you're up to. Show me the top risks and issues that you're working through right now. It's also a great way to manage your suppliers and customers, because unlike sometimes if you've got a project management tool in your organization, very often they're not licensed for everyone under the sun. So they're hard for collaboration. Plus, there's usually some pretty sensitive information in there, financials and things like that. So you can use a RAID log as the tool that spans organizations, just like my UK example. If we'd had a RAID log in place from the beginning to help manage and identify and track those dependencies, we could have saved ourselves a lot of trouble. And then, of course, remediating troubled projects. If you ever get handed a new project that's well underway, or especially if that project is not doing well, or you start work at a new organization and say, here's your project. Using a RAID log is one of the best ways to get the lay of the land and get an understanding of what's going on. So let's wrap up our story in that dank, musty, cigarette smoke stinking old conference room in the UK. So after being there for a week, we were able to actually get the project back on track. And within that week, they actually, at the end of the week, they withdrew their letter officially threatening to cancel the project and charging us for the trouble. And what we had done, we started to gradually build trust again. And it took a long time. It took a couple months for us to really get things back on track for the initiative as a whole. But we got together, got it done, and got it delivered. And I was able to go home finally, which was good. I appreciated that. All right, there we go. Let's recap our talk. So first, projects go wrong because of the basics, and RAID management is great because it helps you manage those basics. And RAID logs are useful regardless of how you work, agile, predictive, or your project size. You've got 8 little projects, or you've got 1 mammoth project you're going to be working on for the next 2 years. But all that said, I hope that the biggest thing that you walk away from this talk with is that whenever you start to feel like you're not totally in control of your project, or you start to feel a lot of uncertainty, or whenever you have to start a new project or take over someone else's project, or have to go save a broken project, I hope the first 5 words that you say to yourself or the other people in the room is show me your raid log. And there we go. So that's my little talk about raid logs. If you want to give it a try, you can use a spreadsheet, use whatever you get your hands on. If you've got one in your organization, just use it. Get out there and do it. If you want to try something new, I believe enough in raid logs. I got tired of spreadsheets and other apps that really aren't fit for purpose. So we're actually building one from the ground up. So for you guys, if you want to give it a go, we're going to give you 90 days free access. Go to raidlog.com. Use this code PMI.WIC. If you want to give it a try, if you've got spreadsheets already your organization uses, use those. That's fine too. This is just another way to do it. I'll send out these slides so you've got this. And then finally, if you want to connect with me, you please connect to me on LinkedIn. If you want to learn more about raid logs, well, there were no raid log books until I wrote one. So you can go find the Ultimate Guide to Raid Log on Amazon. We can get you a link for that if you like as well. And there we go.
Kim, great presentation. So we do have a couple of questions. So Billy asks, can you touch on limitations of Smartsheet and that he loves the collaboration using this tool?
Yes. So first I'll say, get a raid log and do it. Smartsheets will get you going. The limitation I've seen with Smartsheets, and I don't want to discourage you from doing a raid log because of this. It's just at some point you may find that you outgrow it. Smartsheets and a lot of other tools out there, like I don't know, Trello and Asana, you can and ClickUp, you can kind of do a raid log in those, but most of them have this weakness in that when you do it, it's a flat table, right? So it's one sheet, and then there's usually a pick list, and they'll say, "Oh, well, this row is an issue, or this row is a risk or a decision," and that's the row. And there's a couple challenges with this. I mean, it'll get you going, but the challenge with this is that each one of these items is very different. The data you capture is very different. The way you use them, the life cycle for a risk is very, very different. And the data you collect from an issue, which is very different from a decision. And so what you may find is as you get deeper and start using that more and more, is that you find that if you're using it in a flat table, which I think everybody I've seen is use Smartsheets has had the same format, is that you run into limitations because the columns really need different columns to represent the different data needs for each RAID item type, if that makes sense. If you can use more for Smartsheets, then use for Smartsheets.
We have another question posed by Tammy Manovich. She's actually our VP of membership. Hey, Tammy. So she asks, what are your thoughts on tracking all RAID items on a single all-inclusive sheet, not multiple tabs versus separate tab sheets for each item?
I love where that's going, but in practice, I hate it. and this is why. And this is one of the reasons we actually built an app, and why, if you can find a way to use an app, because as important as it is for a project manager to manage RAID, it's also important for a portfolio manager. Because if I run a portfolio that's got, $100 million worth of CapEx spend, if everybody's using individual spreadsheets or individual workbooks somewhere, I don't know what the top 5 are that are impacting my portfolio. Right. And so having them somehow in a place where data can be aggregated so I can see what are the top 5 risks, what are the top 5 issues, what are the top 5 decisions being made. That's really important for me. And it's also a way, if you do it centrally somehow, for you to hold the team accountable to doing a consistent management of RAID. In practice, if you try to do this in one workbook, I've tried it so many times. I've seen organizations try it. It becomes a really big mess. There's file contention. There are just challenges. You've got to have filters being applied and unapplied, and who changed this, and there's not a good audit. It's just really, really painful. I wish it was better. That's actually why we built the product for it, because we felt that pain so many times ourselves.
Good point. So Carolyn, and I don't know if it's Caroline or Carolyn. I apologize, Carolyn. She writes, "Is there an example of a RAID log that has content already populated? She's seen templates, but none with actual sample content."
For part of my podcast, we distributed one. I think we just had one sample in each tab. We had like one sample risk, one sample issue, one sample decision. If you connected me on LinkedIn and asked, I'll send you the spreadsheet template. But yeah, it's useful to do that in our, we've done that as well as in the app, because it's really nice to see some populated data, just
Mhm.
for context.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure that folks get your LinkedIn when we send
Yeah.
out the information about this. And just quickly, I know we're right at one. Just I had a quick question about archiving data within the RAID log. Do you archive it actually inside the log? Does it come? Do you take archive data out of the log and put it somewhere else, or does it never get archived? How does that work?
Generally speaking, as a methodology,
Mhm.
or
Well, yeah, in your RAID log, as an example, does data just stay in there forever, never, never, or do you archive at some point?
so in my application, we are building AI capability because you want to have lessons learned. You want to be able to go back and see past projects,
Gotcha.
and you want that kind of AI, the machine learning, to pick up that past data. So they are sort of archived. You marked it as complete or moved it into a separate portfolio as an archive. But that data is gold. That data is valuable for your organization. So you definitely want to keep it around. And the trick is to make it easy to reference and reuse for future projects so you can learn from it.
Well, listen, we're a little bit over. I just want to say you've got so many comments in chat, all thanking you so much for great information, great presentation, very informative, very appreciative. Tammy writes, "Thanks, Kim. Great session. And for anyone who hasn't reviewed the Happy Hour podcast, she highly recommends. Fun and informative." There you go. You have a fan.
All
Love
right.
that. Well, listen, we'll definitely get this information out to everybody probably by Friday, maybe Monday at the latest in terms of the recording. And then, of course, we'll get a copy of your presentation from you, Kim, as a PDF. We'll make sure that folks who attend get a copy of that as well. And then all these ways in which to contact you and the QR codes to get access to your podcast and the product itself. Great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you had a nice lunch, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. Thanks, Kim.